right. Okay, perfect. Did you do you have a notification that says I'm recording the call?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And joining me back on the program in another one of our all things Eastern European history and current affairs, all things former and current communist party states, and again, coming on to talk specifically about the once united and beautiful country of Yugoslavia is our returning champion, Ivan Stoiljkovic, a Yugoslavian immigrant, Yugoslav-Canadian, who is, Yugoslavian immigrant who's based in Canada, but he is Yugoslavian-Canadian. He's our guest, and and we're on to talk, yes, we're here to talk about the former Yugoslavia, and this is our special follow-up interview after our great 2-hour-long, Ivan's great 2-hour-long presentation about the history of Yugoslavia, the rise and tragic fall of the once united, beautiful country of Yugoslavia. And this is our question and answer session. So first off, Ivan, thank you so much for coming back on the program and taking time out on your Saturday afternoon and evening to come on 1+1.
They're not what they used to be, those Saturday afternoon and evenings. I'm not missing much. I'd rather do this than pretty much anything. Right
Perfect.
Now.
Well, it's a real honor to have you. And yes, let's get straight into it. So for people who might be watching this, first of all, if you are watching this, pause, go to episode 190. I believe it was episode 196 or episode 100. Yeah, I think episode 196. Well, the episode before this, which is Ivan giving us a presentation, a fantastic, epic presentation on the history of Yugoslavia, how the country was founded, the communist era of Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito, and Marshal Tito and the leaders who came after him, the very tragic, and I mean tragic with a capital T, civil war that broke out in Yugoslavia, which is now referred to the former Yugoslavia, and Ivan gave a brilliant presentation on that through an unapologetic Marxist communist Yugoslavian perspective, and I would say also a post-colonial perspective on it. So people should check that out before they watch this. But anywho, this is our follow-up question and answer session on that. So here it goes. So Ivan, my first question is, briefly, if it's possible, what was Yugoslavia like before World War II? And answer this question I've been always wanting to ask, which is Macedonia or North Macedonia, how did that once mighty empire become, a part of the once united Yugoslavia? I'm very curious about that.
Sorry, North Macedonia?
Yes, which used to be part of Yugoslavia, right?
Yeah.
But the only Greek history I was ever taught was ancient Greek history, and I know ancient Greece later became part of the Macedonian Empire. We know I forgot the father's name, but of course everybody knows knows about Alexander the Great. So how did that country, which used to be an empire, the Macedonian Empire, how did that later become part of Yugoslavia?
That's a tricky question. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but it's my understanding that the people that lived, the territory, right?
Yeah.
The territory of current North Macedonia is the territory that was occupied by Alexander the Great and his people, who I guess would be ethnic Greeks, right? Ethnically Greek. The gap of 20 centuries between that and now is a gap in which Greeks, original Macedonians who were Greeks, no longer live there, and Slavs live there. So, Macedonians, current Macedonians, are Slavic people who came down along with other Slavs in, I don't know, 6th, 7th, 8th century or so of New Era, and populated that area. Now, there were times when this area was Bulgaria. There were times when this area was Serbia, since what's now North Macedonia was a part of Serbia coming into the constitution of First Yugoslavia, as in like 1918, right? So after the Second World War, or the Serbian kingdom that entered the First World War included Macedonia, North Macedonia. So that Serbs considered it Southern Serbia. Bulgarians considered it Bulgaria. The language that these people speak there is, as far as I understand, the same language that the Bulgarians speak.
Interesting.
But
So very much a Slavic language then.
Well, Bulgars themselves are kind of mixed between Slavs and Bulgars, Bulgaric tribes. They're not as Slavic, supposedly, ethnically, as the Serbs or the Croats. And there might be an ethnic, if you were to kind of count blood cells over there, you might find some kind of difference between Bulgarians and Macedonians. And there's definitely a few Serbs, mixed in to the mix. So,
it's interesting. What's so interesting about that is now when Macedonia was part of Yugoslavia, what was their what was the religion? Was it an Eastern Orthodox Christianity, very similar to the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church, and all of the different Orthodox churches?
One thing I forgot to mention, very important, I think about 40% of current North Macedonia is Albanians, ethnic Albanians. Okay. Really good movie about that, about what Macedonia was going through in the early 90s. Is called Before the Rain. Amazing movie, people should see it. Sorry, and the reason why we're referring to this as North Macedonia is because Macedonia is a Greek word, and it's a Greek, Greeks objected to Macedonia calling itself Macedonia. Yeah. So anyway, people who look, all these nations were invented at some point. So it's really, there were no modern Macedonians, let's say in 15th century, New Era. There's no Macedonians. There's no Greeks. There's just people. They don't call themselves Greeks, Macedonians, or Turks or anything. It's they're like some of the elites call the people that they rule maybe Serbs, maybe whatever, Macedonians, I don't know. But like none of these nations exist in their current sense at the time. So, Macedonians were invented in the, in the 18th century, late 18th century, not through the 19th century. Some people were claiming this, were beginning to invent this nation, and they finally managed to do it. So they are
it's so funny because who's originally from what we now call North Macedonia was a very famous Turk. You know who I'm talking about? Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was originally from Macedonia.
No, that's the thing.
Father of modern-day secular Republic of Turkey was a Macedonian.
Ultimately, man, like, which is what I'm trying to say. I mean, it kind of defeats the purpose of talking. We may as well drop it. Like, the truth of the matter is, we're so mixed in everywhere in the world that there is no basis for, like, nations are invented, their cultural formations, everybody's mixed in. If you count self, hard enough, you're not gonna come up with a race at the end. You know what I mean? It's like there is no basis for race or ethnicity other than socially constructed what it is. So that's irony of history. Like the founder of modern Egypt is Albanian. Like, not is from Albania. This is. I'm not saying the whole world was invented in the Balkans, but we're mixed. We're terribly mixed, and we have no grounds. We really shouldn't. Ultimately, we need to get over those nations and those differences.
So what was
there's really no basis for them. There's really no material basis for them.
So what was Yugoslavia like before World War II and before it was? It became a very unique communist state. And the reason why I ask that is because so much of history that the Western world, and when I say Western world, I'm talking about Western Europe, I'm talking about, Canada, Australia, the United States, England, and so forth. So yeah, so that's who I call, the Western world. And so, but when we're taught about the history of Europe, we completely skip over so much of the region, so much of the unique history of each of the countries of the continent of Europe. And when we are taught, we're taught about ancient Greece and ancient Rome and how a lot of those influences are still practiced today. But when we talk about World War II, not much is spent talking about World War I, funny enough, except, just that it was a terrible war, but you know what? The good guys won because, the Allies. And then when we're taught about World War II, we're taught that, we're taught about evil Germany, evil Germany, a little bit of basically evil Nazi Germany, and it's as if Europe was a nice, wonderful place until Nazi Germany came and until the rise of the USSR, who Reagan calls the evil empire, and we're taught to completely, shit on Eastern European culture, Eastern European history, because they were backwards with their communism. They're backwards now with their far-right politics, even though it was the West that exported far-right politics into the region. But my friend Boyan says that he's from Bulgaria and Poland, and based in Poland, and he says that the history of Eastern Europe has always been a very brutal history of a tiny minority of aristocrats, monarchists, and very reactionary religious folks ruling very brutally, a kind of the kind of society that Russia was before the Bolsheviks overthrew, the monarchists and set up, the communist states. So was Yugoslavia? Yeah. So very briefly, if it's even possible, talk about Yugoslavian society before World War II and the rise of communism, Marshal Tito.
I just want to go one step back to Macedonia, and because I didn't answer your question fully, and it was just Macedonia, as a Slavic, as a state, was, well, not as a republic, was first recognized during Tito's Yugoslavia. So before that, it was a part of Serbia. Yugoslavia communist Yugoslavia recognized Macedonian nation on the basis of certain, intellectual developments, which made it so that a significant number of people in Macedonia identify themselves as such. So modern Macedonian nation, people who live in North Macedonia make up the majority of the population in those borders. They first got their statehood as a part of the Socialist Yugoslavian project, and that's okay. And it's the same with Bosniaks or Bosnian Muslims. They too did not have, their own state or ethnicity recognized before Yugoslavia. But Socialist Yugoslavia was following, Leninist principles of respecting national, differences or whatever, national belonging. So, the socialist way was, if you feel like you're a nation, cool. We've kind of gone the other way in the 90s and since, and the big, national, whatever, a lot of nationalists will deny each other's existence, right? And so on. So that's one thing about Socialist Yugoslavia, was that it was really promoting these specific ethnicities, which kind of backfired in the long run. But still, that's the difference. Like Serbian nationalists today denies the existence of, Macedonians, denies the existence of Bosnians and so on. Whereas, Serbian communists in the 30s, 40s, whatever, would have been very much in favor of these nations existing and being equal to the Serbian nation. Anyway, so the period between First and Second World War, I agree with your, friend, that it was a kind of a dark period, in a sense that, there wasn't much development happening. People were unhappy. There were small nations getting brutally exploited by larger nations. Yugoslavia was not independent. it was a client state of various, like German Empire, Germany at the time, or Russia with France. Like it was the competing empires were basically playing ping pong with Yugoslavia at the time, and it was also the time of national, awakening. Like it wasn't completed, the process wasn't completed, and it was a very weird situation because, the Serbian king ruled the whole place, and he was trying really hard to transform himself from a Serb into a Yugoslav, but at the same time, people in Macedonia were like, hey, we exist, we're different. He wouldn't recognize them. Croats were like, can we have some kind of recognition that we're different and that have our autonomy or whatever, or language, and so on. And he was like, no, you're all Yugoslavs now. So, it was a rough time. It was not, fun for anybody. People were illiterate. There was, it was this super poor country. And the common or the constant theme, I would say, of history in general, especially modern history, or whatever, the modern world capitalist market era, is that, poverty breeds ethnic nationalism. So that seems to be the kind of like the law of history that we can almost with certainty claim to be true. So what happened in first Yugoslavia, you're the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovens, and then in 1918, and then 29 turning into Kingdom of Yugoslavia. What it was a lot like, Tsarist Russia. It was, a place where nations were oppressed and unhappy, and people were poor and ignorant and desperate, and I don't know. It was not a good place,
Very much.
and,
Yeah,
and it's not like the king wasn't trying, but how do you try? When you have no. I don't know, when you believe in inequality, when you believe, there was a huge separation between kings and queens who were playing, having a good time, some of the urban bourgeoisie, and corruption. I mean, just horrible, obvious corruption, and it's a lot like I compared it in my speech there to banana republics, like to kind of post neo-colonial formations in Latin America. It's like the monarch, the king, the feudal aristocracy, and the small tiny bourgeoisie had their deals with the Western European larger capitalists and got their crumbs, got to have a good time in exchange for selling the country and allowing free reign to what were monopoly national capitals at the time. So Czech
and
factories,
were
English factories,
and
mines.
were the various what was Yugoslavia very much like the region of of Eastern Europe itself? Was it more was it more vicious in its anti-Semitism, its anti-Roma attitudes, institutional Romophobia? Were they more vicious in their anti-Semitism, in their anti-Romophobia, and anti-workers, anti-workers compared to, say, Western Europe, like a France or Italy or Germany, and again, like talking before World War II.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, it's almost like we weren't there yet, type thing. You know what I mean? It was like, I mean, on the one hand, what's important to note is that Germany was not the only country that had anti-Semites or Nazis or fascists. Like Germany, they just came to power in Germany, and Germany was very highly developed and powerful country, like the biggest country in Europe. I mean, outside of the bracketing in British, however you want to count. Let's say British Empire is bigger than Germany, but the same with Russia. But Germany is the Central European power. So, the fact that fascists came to power in Germany and took over made Germany into this powerhouse of fascism. But every country in Europe had fascists, and in various ways. Fascism, as you can tell today, is not even though it's nominally an ethno-nationalist kind of specifically ethnic ideology, race, like one race, one nation, whatever, it's also at the same time, ironically, dialectically, everywhere. It's global. So but I mean, this might be a controversial statement, but my understanding of fascism is that maybe I shouldn't even say that. Maybe it's not true, but let's say that.
Well, for me,
one of the ways,
for me, at least when I was taught about fascism and Nazism and what are the distinctions between the two, is fascism. Yes, you do get the anti-Semitism, you do get the ethno-nationalism and so forth, but it's very much it's more or less focused though on the economics. It really is a suppression workers, suppression of radical communist movements, and the characteristics is, of course, at least with fascist Italy, it was a mix of old school monarchism, corporations dominating, but a very a very brutal police state that kept the workers in line, that kept the liberals in line. Whereas Nazi Germany, it's that, but it's very much highly focused on ethno-nationalism, racial science, like eugenics and stuff like that. And that's why, Nazi Germany, they were very much like obsessed with having a living space, a greater Germany, the anti-Semitism is baked in the skin. The anti-Russia stuff is baked in the skin, and a lot of just very hyper ethno-nationalism, German nationalism, which has no room for Poles, has no rooms for various Slavic people, has no room for Russians, and has no room for what they call Judeo-Bolshevism and stuff like that. So, which was why, Italy, they weren't so much on, they were anti-Semites, but they weren't so much on board with the whole, eradicating of like the, the Jewish race and stuff like that. That was basically like Nazi Germany that kind of, that was more of a Nazi Germany thing, which
Spain too, right? You could say that Spain was similar. Portugal, they were similar to Italy in that sense. But, you look at the Croatian independent state of Croatia, you even look at the Serbian fascists who managed to get in power there in Serbia proper. You look at the banderistas there, in Ukraine, they are acting a lot like Nazis in Germany.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Even though they are, again, like, mini Nazis, but they're no, so I don't know if it might be just a matter of, like, I guess the question is why, why Italy turned out the way it did and Germany turned out the way it did. And I think that in terms of like living space, Italians were just as interested in the empire as the Germans, right? Now, I don't think there were as many Jews in Italy. I don't think that, Italy's like 10 years earlier. Italian fascism is born directly out of the First World War as a response to revolution. Same with German fascism, but it doesn't come to power until later when, maybe the racial science got a little bit more advanced and the militarization proceeded to the point of, fascism in Italy made the trains run on time. Fascism in Germany made the military that was literally capable of conquering the goddamn world. There's a difference of scale. So you know what I mean? That's the thing. It's like Marx is talking about. I know this is unrelated, but like it's just how things work. Like sometimes the scale equals quality. Quantity turns into quality. You know what I mean? So like what he was saying in Capital about how, people often say like, oh, capitalism was always there. Yeah, it was in embryonic stage. It was there in Roman Empire in the Middle East in whatever, 5th century or something, 6th, 7th. But it's when it, when capitalist relations became, combined with like steam engine, that thing basically, turned, and we entered the capitalist world market, capitalist era, and so on. So but this is the same thing with like Nazism is fascism on steroids. Nazism is fascism on another level, and like Italy was weaker, smaller, softer in many ways, but Croatia was even weaker and softer than Italy, and somehow Croatian Nazis were more racist, more vicious, and more race scientific than Italians. So, and Serbs too, like people forget about Serbs because Nazis, in Croatia did a huge job. Like they just did a lot of killing. Serbs didn't do as much killing, but Serbs got exterminated, like Serbian fascists exterminated Serbian Jews overnight like this. Like there was no enrollment.
But is it safe to say that because so much of Eastern Europe had these mini monarchist states that did the bidding of an Ottoman Empire or did the bidding of a Russian Tsarist Empire, and again emphasis on Russian Tsarist Empire, or the different competing monarchs of a Germany or France. Well, France not not monarchs, but the French Empire though. So due to the fact that so much of these plutocratic states, aristocratic states, because of how they treated their peasantry or treated people who worked in the industrial sector very brutally under the model of the kind of the Tsarist Russian model, or whatever was the empire that they wanted to emulate. Is that why in Yugoslavia and in much of Eastern Europe there was such a strong communist movement, such a strong left-wing movement, but very much a strong communist movement? People very much influenced by Marxist, by Marxist ideology, Lenin's, journalism and so forth. So when the Russian Revolution, when the Bolsheviks hijacked, the Russian Revolution and installed, a socialist state, and certainly, socialism with Russian characteristics. That's why in Eastern Europe you also had all these huge communist movements, which when World War II comes along, the first people to be very brutally eradicated are, before the genocide of Jews, before the genocide of different Slavic people, before the genocide of like Poles, before the genocide of Roma people, there was what we call a politicide. There was people who were basically murdered and wiped out because of their political ideology, and that's where you have the huge first political suppression, but later, death camps of people with who harbored communist ideology and were sincerely communist in their beliefs.
It's complicated, man. Like, I don't like, that's a hard question. Why was it that, and Eastern Europe is not the same. It's not all the same. Poland was right next to Germany, partitioned between Germany and Soviet Union. Like, just, there was no resistance as such possible, in a sense. They were way too close. You know what I mean? Yugoslavia came later, and Yugoslavia really, like, it's a different story. You know what I mean? Story between, like, Bulgarian story, Polish story, Ukrainian story. No, maybe not Ukrainian, whatever, Czech. They're different from Yugoslavia. Why? Because Yugoslavia, the difference is that in Yugoslavia, this movement really, like, blossomed. Like, communism in Yugoslavia, happened in a big way, and right away. And the thing is that, they were ready. Like, a lot of, and I'm not saying that it didn't happen in Poland, it didn't happen in Czechoslovakia, it didn't happen in Bulgaria. It did. They were all pretty strong. And the main reason why they were strong is probably because of that Pan-Slavic kind of history that had something to do with it, and also because they were trained in Soviet Union. Like, Soviet Union was the hub where, Dimitrov in Bulgaria, Tito, all these post-war leaders, the communist cadre, the leadership of the communist parties were trained. And, nationalism had everything to do with it. The national oppression, the fact that, Eastern Europe felt colonized, neo-colonized, in a sense, what we would call neo-colonized. So not formally, but economically completely subjugated and colonized, but also formally once the Germans attacked, right? Like it was for the French, it was like a fight between two empires. In Eastern Europe, it was a fight of people who were being colonized because they were considered racially inferior against the colonizers. So it was like, there was multiple levels of national oppression. Like a Croat in Yugoslavia felt oppressed by the Serbian king. He felt oppressed also by the British factory owner or French factory owner, and he then ended up feeling oppressed by the German occupier, right? So there's multiple levels of oppression, and the real weapon that communists deployed in Yugoslavia was, on the one hand, of course, this kind of promise of a better world, equality, good living, right? Like not being, overthrowing the bourgeois system, getting rid of the bosses. But on the other hand, they offered also national liberation. They were like, you are going to have your own country within this. A lot of Montenegrins, a lot of Macedonians, a lot of, Croats, so all the nations other than the Serbs, joined resistance. Part of like a big reason, part of why they joined resistance was to liberate themselves from Serbian king. You know what I mean? Now the Serbs themselves, they were getting slaughtered, and that's why they were actually the majority of the whole communist movement in Yugoslavia, because they had no choice. It was either fight the Nazis or you get literally exterminated, because that was independent state of Croatia's official policy, is to exterminate the Serbs. And there was a lot of them in what ended up being, independent state of Croatia. So every nation had a reason there, to join, because Lenin said right of nations to self-determination, right? Lenin and Stalin. And that was on the books, and that was really a big selling point,
Well, that's a perfect segue then to my second question, which is talk to us about the Yugoslav war hero of World War II, Marshal Tito. In your presentation, you did a very good job talking about his legacy, the good, the bad, what made his communism unique compared to others, and you also talked about some of the ugliness that did exist in the Yugoslav communist period. So yeah, talk to us about Marshal Tito and his legacy.
I mean, he was of peasant origin. I've been to the village where he was born a few times. It's high up in the mountains on the border of Croatia and Slovenia. Literally, like, one parent Slovenian, the other one Croatian. Very similar people, same religion, but he was very early. He became an industrial worker, right? Like he left the village and apprenticed as a locksmith, and started working in factories. Now, what we kind of didn't mention earlier is that, the embryo of the Communist Party or the Communist movement is in the factories. So like the first kind of incarnation, the first communist, the beginnings of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia are in the western part of Yugoslavia, in the factories. So it was not, about nationalities originally. When Tito was born in 1892. So, he was 1912, and he was an industrial, worker, and ended up in the military. And as I said already, in the military, he was in Austria for a while. So he basically hung around that Western, more industrialized part of Yugoslavia, and he was a communist from right away. He was not, he didn't go through phases. He didn't waver. he didn't, fall in love with, I don't know, conservative ideologies at any point. He was
proper red diaper baby.
Proper red diaper baby. I don't know. See, red diaper baby sounds like a son of the academics, in the West. He wasn't. His dad wasn't a Marxist with a job at a university. His parents were not industrial workers. They were peasants, right? So he was not a red diaper baby, but he was an authentic, industrial worker, proletarian. Like Tito was a proletarian with proletarian ideology. He was a communist, 100% authentic factory floor communist. And he was involved in the organizing, in strikes, in labor militancy and all this stuff. So that's his formation. He joins the party. He was in Russia when it happened. So he was deployed. He was a good soldier for Austro-Hungarian military. He was distinguished. He was a good fighter. But he ended up wounded, captured, and defecting essentially to Soviet Union. And that's where he got the training. It was like, hey, there's a revolution here. I like this a lot. And then he became the child of the Comintern. He became trained to go back and do the revolution in his own country, and he did. So he was. Yeah, again, I hark on the beginnings. There is no really, there's no. It's kind of sketchy what happened there in the 30s, right? In the purges and whatnot, and everybody was kind of hanging out. The whole, Comintern was very strong. Under Stalin, there was a very strong, centralized, party, the communist movement, whatever the word is. Anyway, it's not necessarily even true that all the directives were coming from up above. It was they were in Moscow plotting together. Bulgarian was in charge officially, and Yugoslavs and everybody else, the Western Europeans as well. But the further you get away, the less kind of influence there really was. But especially the Eastern European communist cadres, communist leadership, they were in Moscow all the time. Plotting what to do together, and they had a line, and they had these, they would come up with decisions, with responses to particular situations, and it was, Leninism 101. It's like, what's happening? Let's respond, and they went from, they when the Soviets made a deal with the Nazis to not fight for in Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, communists across Eastern Europe stopped attacking Nazis. They just stopped attacking, doing the revolution for a little while. And but they were ready. They knew what was coming. That's another thing. Nobody was at the time or since, nobody for a second, except the most cynical and the most, I don't know, disingenuous, liberals will claim that that was anything other than a momentary truce between sworn enemies. Like the communists at no point, thought that they're friends with Nazis. They were just like, we need a few, we can use a year or two before we
In England,
inevitable.
Their World War II hero, rightly or wrongly, is Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., FDR, that's people's World War II hero. In France, Charles de Gaulle is France and certainly Western Europe's World War II hero. But when it comes to Eastern Europe, I think much of the communist resistance are the heroes. But certainly in Yugoslavia, General Marshal Tito, is a World War II hero, not just for Yugoslavia, but I would say for much of Eastern Europe. I think it's safe to say, right?
For the whole world. I mean, it's the Western Europeans are not going to recognize that, but necessarily. But he, and I don't know why. That's another huge question about Tito, about Yugoslavia. Like, why is he like this kind of unknown hero, right? Because he's huge.
Because he's a communist. Because he's a communist.
So is Che. So is Ho Chi Minh. So is Che. So is Mao. So is Stalin, Lenin, Trotsky. Like, I mean, like Fidel. Tito's not like, you don't get shirts with Tito. Like, and at the same time, like, he didn't really write anything. He didn't make any glorious speeches or anything, but he did the job. Like, it's huge. I mean, seriously, the first liberated territory in occupied Europe is in Serbia, in Yugoslavia. Tito's doing it himself. He's right there. Tito, like Užice, a little town on the border of Serbia and Bosnia, all liberated from the Nazis, set up like weapons factory, printing press, like a socialist, little middle socialist state, 1941, like right away, like summer 1941. So, and then just on and on, like more and more. I mean, they lost that little territory for, and then whatever, they were running away and Nazis were chasing them, but like there was almost 1 million people under arms by 1944, and they had, all of Bosnia liberated. They had, half, like they had basically the center of the country liberated from the Nazis, and like, Nazis had to move their sixth, whatever it was called, Sixth Army, from fighting Soviet Union to deal with Bosnia, with Yugoslavia, and like, again, like it's crucial. Like that move, when Hitler is looking at the situation, he's like, shit, I didn't get the job done in Russia, and now I have to move. I'm losing in Russia already. It's like 50-50, and now I have to move my main guy. The main Sixth Army is the one that went into Soviet Union to deal with this bastard, in Yugoslavia. So, you could call him military genius. He was called military genius by people in the West and in the East. I mean, some of the battles are just genius moves, like Battle of Neretva. They blew up a bridge, and everybody thought that they're not crossing the river, and then they built like a makeshift little bridge, and everybody crossed the river. It's like just there's a movie about it, but brilliant, like strategic military moves, and just heroic, like extremely heroic, like selfless, crazy fighting, against the Nazis, and the way. So, like when Germany, when Britain and France and United States, they were looking at Yugoslavia and they were like, we have our guys, our conservative/liberal coalition, bourgeois / constitutional monarchy people. Their king is family with our king, queen. These are all like they had their guys on the ground, and then they had Tito, who's like a communist, who says, I'm gonna, take over and there will be no capitalist in my country. I'm gonna, do the same thing Comrade Lenin did. And Churchill, who's, we all know, a genocidal maniac, colonial race, like, no, not much different from Hitler, super capitalist kind of, person. And he's looking at this and he's like, shit, I have to support this bastard because he is winning the war. He's winning the war. And,
Wow.
and my guys aren't doing shit. Like, he destroyed them. He destroyed the monarch, like the monarchist army. Like, they were the official army. They had all the weapons. They had, they owned that state. And party was buzzing in the cities among the kids, students, industrial working class, all this stuff, peasants, but not the peasants, right? But they turned, they just got the whole country behind them, and did the job. And that's the real kind of story of the Second World War, which needs to be told, and there really should be, movies about Tito, and there's so many movies about all kinds of.
And our fellow Marxists and those who are unapologetically communist, there should be more posters of Tito, shirts with Tito, flags of like the Yugoslav flag that he had, and yeah, I completely agree with you.
I mean, I think I need to bring it up, right? Like, I need to bring, so look, I mean, the thing is that they were really honorable during the Second World War. Like, Tito's army was disciplined. They did not, kill civilians. They did not, exact any revenge. They, like, it was, you can get killed for trying to kill civilians. Like, it was very disciplined, very honorable. I mean, that's another huge reason why they were, they were fair. They would come in and they would take, they instituted socialism in village by village, and they were literally making sure that everybody's fed and taken care of, and whoever's the sickest gets, the first helping. And they were amazing.
That's a perfect segue. Sorry to interrupt, but then that's a perfect segue to talk about, again, his legacy. So talk to us about the good. So talk to us about about communism with Yugoslavian characteristics. The good. The good legacy of Tito, some of the bad legacy of Tito, and some of the, talk about both, the good legacy he left and the bad legacy he left.
Of course, the Nazis, Nazis, especially Croatian Nazis, will, disagree with what I just said, because, and they will rightfully say that, at the end of the World War, there was a massive massacre of Croatia, the remnants of the Croatian Nazi army.
Yeah.
And that story is, their foundational story. They pretend that they never exterminated Jews, Roma, and Serbs, that they were innocently, for some reason, for no reason, killed in the woods on the border of between Yugoslavia and Austria.
Well, kind of like the excuse that people make of Stepan Bandera, that he is a national Ukrainian hero, and that he only sided with the Nazis because he was fighting Russian imperialism and Soviet imperialism. That's the excuse that people make of Stepan Bandera, when the more you actually dig into Stepan Bandera, the more it's like, no, he wasn't. The guy was the guy. He's not a piece of shit. He's entirely a shitty person that had shitty, disgusting views and was just a far right douchebag who was a Nazi collaborator because he sincerely believed in Nazism and only broke away from Nazism because he wanted his own Nazi state, not just to be like, a client state of Nazi Germany.
Even the Italians, they all believed in Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy. They believed in Chronicles of the Elders of Zion. They believed that there was no doubt. There's no fascist who doesn't believe in that. You know what I mean? They were all the same, and everybody know. And the thing is, like, you know, Croatian, Pavelić, Ustaša, whatever, Croatian. The thing is, these guys were like a small group, eh? Like they were not popular. They were installed by Nazis. You know what I mean? They were hiding in the monasteries. That's the thing. They were groomed in Italy. Like Mussolini is not innocent, man. Like Italian fascists are not, you know, mild. They're not mild. You know, yes, they were weak. They were weak. They couldn't carry out the what they wanted to. You know what I mean? But anyway, these guys. So, you know, in Yugoslavia, there's no such excuse. They do say that, but if you look at the situation, when Croatian Ustaša movement was installed by the Italians and the Germans in Croatia, in like greatly expanded Croatia to include all of Bosnia and a huge chunk of Serbia, there was no communist threat. They didn't have to save the Croats from the communists. You know what I mean? They weren't saving anybody. They had complete reign, complete control over the country. It was an independent country. They had control over it. They had no reason to go off and exterminate Serbs. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, but they went and did it, and they tried to do it, and they did quite well. So, you know, the thing is, like, at the end of the Second World War, there was a point at which the Nazi Germany and Italy capitulated. Well, Nazi Germany finally capitulated, and they all gave up arms, gave themselves up to whoever was there, right? To the Soviet Red Army or to the Americans or whatever. And these guys wouldn't give up. They continued to fight. Why? Because they knew that the communists knew what they did and that they're going to pay for it. They didn't want to pay for it. They also knew that the Americans are going to save them, because ultimately they knew that. They knew that Americans are lenient, that Americans actually love Nazis, and that their dispute is not big, that their dispute is very small, and that they're ultimately, you know, it was just Hitler went too far. In that sense, you know, it's kind of true that, you know, Italians are different, because, you know, had Hitler not kind of went full on crazy and thought that he could conquer everybody, I mean, they had to defend themselves ultimately, right? He attacked them. He attacked them. He attacked the you know.
But I think the reason why you bring all this up is because, you know, when we talk about Tito's purging, Tito's suppression of political enemies, Tito was. He was basically eradicating. He was basically eradicating people who harbor these views, people who openly were fascist, people who actually collaborated with the Nazis, and yeah, he did. And he
not necessarily true though. That's the thing. Like it wasn't even him. Like he wasn't there, but the military, the partisan army that liberated Yugoslavia ended up killing about 100,000. I mean, this is a high number, but let's say 100,000 Croatian Nazis who continued to fight, right? So, you know, it's not like they gave themselves up and got killed. They decided to continue to fight, and 100,000 of them got killed. So, you know, there's no eradication. There's a battle, and these guys don't give up. And it's because the Americans turned them back. So they try to cross into Austria, and Americans are like, no, the rule says you give yourself up to Yugoslavians. They're like, we're never going to give ourselves up. Fuck the communists, blah, blah, blah. Shoot, 100, done, finished. They got killed. That's not cool, but it's not, what are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? Like, it's basically, you can't, it was a battle. It was a battle. They had no chance. They decided to die. They made their last stand. And it's not true that, you know, people who gave themselves up and who you know, stood trial and whatnot got eradicated. No, You know, some people, small number of proven collaborators, were quickly, sentenced and executed. But 90%, there was no really, what communist leadership or whatever, the Communist Party, when it came to power, did was be very lenient to the people who gave themselves up. They were not persecuted. They were,
which is why, ironically,
they
when
lost property. Like they lost property. They lost. Which
is why, ironically, when I was listening to your presentation, I thought to myself, "Geez, Tito actually was too soft on the fascists. He actually should have. He actually should have done what the Afghan communists were trying to do until stupid America, Jimmy Carter and Reagan and their crooks, in Pakistan and in Saudi Arabia did, which was basically like export like Wahhabism and the most vile reactionary forms of Islam into Afghanistan, when they actually, we would not have had the Taliban if the whole world had just let the Afghan communists do what they were doing with their Soviet backers. So Croatia. So
the parallel there is that a lot of them were accepted. You know what I mean? The thing was, like, a lot of them did end up in Austria, and through Austria in North America and so on. Americans did take as many as they could. There was just too many of them, and it was very obvious, and they just couldn't handle and they were too crazy. That's the thing. These people were like hardcore. Like, they were more hardcore than Nazis. Like, Nazis gave themselves up. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like, literally, like, I mean, they the ones that did give themselves up did not die. You know what I mean? They just wouldn't. They were making the last possible stand in contrary to all the agreements between all the combatants. You know what I mean? Like, the Nazis in every other country gave themselves up, and these, Croatian, mostly Croatian Nazis, they were so vile, they were so hardcore, they were so, willing to go all the way, and that's what happened to them. But the ones that gave themselves up, they were okay. So, later though, like, the thing is, like, Yugoslavia, like 48, like only 3 years later, there's this split between Yugoslavia and Soviet Union. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that, like I described somewhat, that's also a really complicated, messy story. But the bottom line is, this is where this is the really ugly spot on Tito's, in my opinion, on Tito's, legacy, right? Because, people talk about, Stalin's purges, like, this was what Tito did to Stalinists, to people who were loyal to Soviet Union, was, I mean, on a smaller scale, but it's a smaller country, right? But it was vile. It was torture.
You think
Stalin,
so you think Tito was actually much more harsher on Yugoslav Stalinists than he actually was on the vile far right of mostly Croatia, of mostly a uniquely Croatian.
Nazis, Croatian super special, worst Nazis in the history of the world. like literally, Germans were like, "What the fuck are you doing? This is crazy. Don't like smash people's heads with hammers." Like, they had special, like, slaughtering mittens with, like, they were creative, they were brutal, they were so brutal. It's like, Nazis were like, this is horrible, like, put them in a fucking gas chamber, like shoot them, don't you know what I mean, don't do this, don't torture, like, women, Like don't
yeah, exactly.
don't pull out babies
exactly.
out
just,
of
just like Japanese Nazism, Japanese fascism is even more vile and disgusting. When you watch a documentary on what Japan did to China and all the other countries that they brutally conquered, it's so disgusting. It's so vile. You feel like you're watching a horror movie that your brain goes, dude, I don't know why you're watching this, but I'm gonna go on standby, have fun watching this. Like basically, like you black out. You can't believe like this is literally stuff that you see in the most disgusting horror movies. And so that's how vile Croatian Nazism
those
was.
guys got shot. Those guys got shot in a battle. The people that opposed Tito, his comrades from Spanish Civil War, like communists, man. Like these were good people. these were his comrades in arms. These were people that went way back, like 20.
But then that sounds to me, before we talk about some of the great social achievements of the once beautiful former Yugoslavia, but then it sounds to me, we were talking off the air last time about Tito and much of the left, especially the Western left, the anti-communist left, their obsession with non-aligned movement. We're not for the American Empire, but we're not for the Soviet Empire. We're neither Washington or Moscow, neither Paris or London. This obsession of being non-aligned, which is basically, I am of the opinion, and I'm going to be doing future programs with my colleagues, my comrades at the Barricade, which is a Pan-Eastern European left-wing news outlet, and we're going to be having this question directed at an Eastern European audience, but I think it would do a lot of good if the Western left also listen to this, that we need to move beyond anti-communism leftism. This self-red baiting we do, this self-McCarthyism that we do, where we have to where we have to censor our language. We have to say things like, "Oh, I'm a socialist, but I'm not. But I'm a democratic socialist," or "I'm for socialism, but not that Soviet socialism, not that Maoist Chinese socialism." And where it's this bizarre thing where you can protest against the Vietnam War, but you have all of these Western leftists that de facto supports the pivot to Asia, the idea of containing China, the idea that China is a rival capitalist country, or even that or even that China has a hideous version of socialism, therefore they don't deserve our solidarity and so forth. So going back to Tito's legacy, this whole idea of the non-aligned movement that we can get along with China, but we don't want but we don't want alliances with the Soviet Union because their version of socialism is too hideous. But we certainly do not want America, this capitalist settler colonial regime dictating us what we should do. But in the end of the day, okay, so Yugoslavia was allowed to have its communism without much Soviet influence, but still, that's overcompensation that Tito was doing of being non-aligned, being friendly with the Americans, friendly with the Brits, friendly with NATO countries, friendly with the Soviet Union. In the end of the day, the moment he dies, and the moment he dies, that's when counter-revolutionary elements from the West later dissolved the former Yugoslavia, right?
48 split. Tito was the first. Yugoslavia was the first communist country to defect, to split away from the communist bloc. That's huge. Like, people don't think about that. You know what I mean? Like, there's like all kinds of parties in the West following Hoxha later because he was special. You know what I mean? There's anyway, this whole idea of being, against Stalin or against Soviet Union begins, like in Yugoslavia. There's, Prague Spring 68. There was thing in Hungary 56. All these things, they're all after you. This is the original sin, in a sense. Like, and now, how like non-aligned movement is totally a part of this. But what's interesting is that, it appears that what happened was not Tito saying no to Stalin. That was his big, claim to fame or whatever. That's his followers, the people who love him, who are with him on this matter, are saying he said no to Stalin and no to the Americans, and he's so like amazing. He was kicked out. Stalin said, "Get out of here. We don't want you. You're not a proper communist." And, it's not that simple, but like it's more like if I had to like give, percentages to how much this was, Soviet Union cutting ties with Yugoslavia versus Yugoslavia saying no to Soviet Union, it was more the former. It was more Soviet Union saying, you're displaying, you're behaving like a Trotskyist, you're behaving like a nationalist, you're not a proper communist. You have to come over here, repent, and like do what the rest of us are doing. And or you're rogue. And he just didn't show up. And he was afraid, rightfully so, because, but in an interview, Tito's being asked, why didn't you talk to, like, there was like, he was there in the 30s, and like people were like plotting against him, and he had like disputes like within the Comintern, and why didn't you talk to Stalin? And he says, I didn't want to talk to Stalin because, I didn't want him to know that I exist. He was like afraid of him. But at the same time, the important, interesting thing is that when they asked him, how come he didn't purge you at the time? He says, it's because I was a real communist. He's not saying I was lucky, I fooled him, he was a crazy man. No, like he basically says Stalin purged those who were sketchy, who were too close to the intellectuals, too close to the West, too close to the Germans, people who, you know what I mean? He was basically saying, and that's the interesting thing, is like, you never go full Trotsky, and that's the, like, he had every reason to kind of tell a different story, but he was fair, and he was like, no, Stalin didn't purge me because I was a really good communist. I spent time in jail in Yugoslavia. I was in Yugoslavia when it was really scary. I mean, in former monarchist Yugoslavia, when I risked my life, I fought really hard. I'm a real worker, like I said from the beginning. I'm an industrial proletarian. I'm not an intellectual. I'm not a Trotskyist. so that's interesting. So non-aligned movement is again, like this is where the story, you can tell different stories, right? But like this story that I'm telling makes non-aligned movement not so much something that was always there. It's not like Tito was always, this kind of like a hardcore kind of nationalist who was more nationalist than communist. And he naturally gravitated towards nationalist regimes. And when he had to, pick between communism and nationalism, he picked nationalism. It's more that Yugoslavia was put in a situation where they were really communist, but not communist enough to have continued support from Soviet Union, and they didn't want to go to the imperialists, and they had to do something. You know what I mean? They had to do something. So they tried to, like, you could even, like, this is a far stretch, but like you could even make an argument that non-aligned movement was a way for Tito to get back into the communist fold. Or you could even say that non-aligned movement was a Trojan horse of the Soviets, in a way. We'll never know these things. It's very messy and complicated. And Tito always had a relationship with the West. So, and especially after the split, like he basically had to. He's like we expected, Yugoslavia expected to be attacked by Soviet Union, and the tanky thing that they were expecting. And again, who's the tanky? Not Stalin. Stalin is not the tanky. Stalin didn't do it. Who did it? Khrushchev did it. That's the thing. So it's like, it's really interesting, just from the perspective of the communist movement in history. Like we have the case of the first split with Soviet Union, first anti-Stalinist, like with power, with like Trotsky's a loose intellectual whatever, right? Like doesn't have a state behind him. It doesn't have a country. It doesn't have a movement. Doesn't have a non-aligned movement. Tito did. But
it's not that. But
at the same time, sorry. One more thing, like about Tito is like in another like nice story is that Tito is the guy that Fidel was looking up to. Tito is the guy that Ho Chi Minh was looking up to. Tito is the guy that Mao was looking up to. Tito is the guy that does it on his own, that applies Leninism to applies dialectical Marxism to his historical materialism to his conditions in his own country, and makes a revolution. So this is the second revolution. This is the second communist revolution, and that's a huge thing. So it's not like there was a revolution in Russia. There was a bunch of revolutions that failed in Europe after that, and then there's 1943 in the middle of the Second World War. Second successful communist revolution, and it's really not it's not surprising then that they split, because that's what happens. You have your own revolution, and then every country following that had its own revolution, had its own thing. There was a split with China and the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Not everyone, but like whatever. There was like a Vietnamese had a thing against the Chinese. Like Yugoslavia and China didn't actually continue to work together. Yugoslavia kind of, pivoted kind of, like Yugoslavia and China had their own split, where the Chinese were basically saying the same things that the Soviet Union was saying to Yugoslavia. You're nationalists, you compromise communist principles, blah blah blah.
And also China, some of the more darker moments, shameful moments of Chinese foreign policy history was China's backing of the backward Pol Pot, who got into power thanks to the CIA's illegal bombing of Cambodia as a way to, fight Vietnam with a proper, with a proper client state. China's backing, China's backing of Pol Pot, Deng Xiaoping when it came to South Africa. Those were some of the shameful moments of Chinese foreign policy, which is why China. Anyways, that's another story for another day. But yeah, just to say that there were differences.
Final thing about Tito, just because before I don't know if we're gonna get to the later part, but like this kind of darkness, this shameful moment, Goli Otok, like Naked Island. They set up an island and they made it a twisted torture island. Too cold, no water. People were like made to just like horrible things. Like they were humiliating each other. They had to beat each other. They were beating confessions out of each other, and it just wasn't enough. And like it was like the thing was set up, and these are all communists. These are all Stalinists, like the real old communists. that Tito had his own purge. Like, so Stalin got rid of Trotskyists, Tito got rid of Stalinists. There's definitely a parallel, but like Tito was, worse. Like Stalin eliminated his competition, summary trials, people were tortured, confessed, got executed, put in, gulags, whatever, worked hard, built some dams and whatnot. But Tito, these guys were hauling stone not to build anything. They were literally being made. There was some kind of experiment in how much you can humiliate each other. You know what I mean? And there is no ideological grounding for this. That's what's weird. And again, I mean, it's not. Again, it's like you can't really say Tito, because we're going to come to Milošević later and his dispute with Serbian at some point, I guess. Like the hardcore, Serbian, I don't know, super.
Well, before we get actually, before we
let me finish. Let me finish. What I'm saying is that there's no grounds. There's no, like, Stalin had beef with Trotsky. Trotsky tried, like, they competed for power. You know what I mean? They were like, they built these ideologies between them. And I mean, I guess you could say it's similar with Tito, but like, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, maybe that, like, it wasn't a large scale. Like, there was 16,000 people supposedly there, 4,000 of them killed. It's not a huge number, but it was ugly. It was really ugly.
Okay, but now let's talk about the good aspects of communism in Yugoslavia, communism with Yugoslav characteristics. What were some of the great social achievements, socialist policies that the entire world, the entire left should be championing and adopting that did exist in the former Yugoslavia?
Healthcare, educate, everything was free, man. Everything was taken care of. Like, the rights were really extra, like healthcare was completely free. Like, drugs were free, every kind of healthcare, dental.
So pharmacare, what people are fighting, what the left is fighting for in Canada, that existed under Tito. Mental health care, universal mental health care merged into the single payer system, that was free in Yugoslavia.
Self-management, you ran your own workplace. Like, people weren't getting fired. You couldn't get fired. Like, my Croatian grandmother was like she was some kind of supervisor or director, I guess, of some one of the post offices or something, and she was telling a story about how there was an alcoholic. One of the people was an alcoholic struggling with alcoholism, couldn't show up to work, didn't show up to work, showed up drunk, just not, They took care of him. He got like many years off. He was, getting healed. Like, he was getting medical treatment, you know what I mean? And came back reformed or whatever, but like, the option of firing somebody was not on the table. People did not get fired, and it wasn't, and at the end, the workplaces were not top down work. Like, I mean, the workplaces were run by the workers. It wasn't perfect anarchist utopia. There was management, there were directors. As I said, my grandmother was something like that. There were people in positions, you could say positions of power, but they were subject to worker control, right? And the workers had control over the workplace, and nobody ever got fired. You couldn't get fired, so what I was really, I mean, this is like personal stories now, like, what really stood out to me was not just that, like, all education was free, and like including food and board. Like, if you got into if you got into a university, it was competitive. It wasn't easy to get into a university, but like, there was a level field. You know what I mean? It's not like anyway. We didn't achieve communism by any means, but you know, poor kids that worked hard from villages would end up in Belgrade studying at a university, and they would be completely taken care of. They would have room, board, food, books, you know, tuition free. Like there was no, they didn't, their parents didn't need to send them anything.
Free, not like actually free, not
actually.
Not even like a low cost college or a low cost tuition. Just like no, like come on in, we'll train you, and it's all taken care of by
nobody ever paid for school. You know, like I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe I'm lying. Like I don't know. Like I was a kid, but like there may have been like nominal fees for things. Maybe there was. I don't know. Maybe you pay $20 a year added to your electricity bill for everyone's education or so. You know what I mean? Like I mean, we paid transit fares, like super dirt cheap, still are. But like there was, you know, I never paid because I don't know. Like you just got on the bus and you never worried about it. But like my grandmother would, you know, buy the ticket and click it or whatever. So there were some things like that, but and that's later. That's like 80s, right? So what I remember is late 80s. But what I was really impressed by, what I think is really cool, is and music schools too. That's why I'm a violin teacher, because you know, free music schools. Like after music schools, like school like a so there's like a regular school, and then in the afternoon, 2 times a week, you go to music school, you get your instrument lesson, you get, you know, ear training, you get orchestra on the weekends, performances, blah, blah, like holistic, complete, really good music education that you would have to be literally, you know, like a really rich to have in the West, right? Like, because you know, I'm a music teacher here, so you can pay for half an hour lesson a week, you know, sacrifice, pay the lesson. You can't do it on welfare on a minimum wage, but you can do it if you have 2 good jobs or whatever. But this wasn't just half an hour. It was like 45 minutes twice a week for instrument, plus theory, plus ear training, plus orchestra, right? So put that all up, that's thousands of dollars in the West. You don't even get it. There are no music schools. There are private lessons in the studios in the back of the music store, you know, with no windows. So it's not, you know, so what, like when I say education, I don't mean, you know, high school. I mean music schools, art schools, university, higher, all levels of university. I don't mean like just, you know, you go to school, you get food. Like you get lunch, dinner, like not dinner, but breakfast, lunch, right? At school, that's included. Again, there may have been a fee, but it's not like, and it was definitely not a fee for single parents, for example. Like the kids of single parents, like if there was no father for whatever reason, right? Usually no father, but like sometimes they don't have a mother. Either way, they didn't pay for anything. They were entitled to summer and winter vacation and school excursions. So you know what I mean? Like when we went to whatever to see, you know, these whatever museums, they were like, they took us to Užice. They took us to this place where the first liberated state in 1941 was established, right? A place called Užice. That was a school trip. Let's go see these factories where partisans set up, you know, the factories and the schools and all this stuff, the little mini socialist state. Like this is in embryo Yugoslavia, really, you know. That was covered, man. Like maybe there was a fee for people who could afford it, but you know, the kids that couldn't, they went for free. Summer vacations were like organized through workplaces. You know, kids would go for free. And again, like people could it was a right. It was a right to go to the seaside every summer.
And
I was
apart
right.
and apart from Romophobia, which unfortunately still existed during the communist period, but the idea of homelessness, something very dear to your hearts. When you were running for the mayor of Kingston, Ontario, you and your collective, you and your comrades made housing the number one priority, housing as a human right. So homelessness in Yugoslavia, you said, was even the whole concept of homelessness just did not exist in Yugoslavia, apart from the racism that that the Roma Sinti community faced, right? Or
I mean, the thing is, it didn't quite exist here either at the time. If we look at the early 80s, for example, it's like 1980s, and Roma are the the issue, because they were very poor, and they lived in, not all of them, but like they were shanty towns. They were settlements of Roma people that were not proper housing, and it was almost like a two-tier system. You know what I mean? There was I don't know. Like, I mean, this is something that I'm gonna claim ignorance on, but like I don't really know, what the mechanism according to which people ended up living like that was. There's a tendency to say, they wouldn't, and it's delicate, right? Because Roma people like to move around, right? And there's generational kind of tendency towards, it's just generational poverty, right? Illiteracy. They're not European in a sense. Like, they don't have a history of statehood. They don't have a history of, written language, literature, and all these things that other European nations have. And they were always oppressed. And that was the case in Yugoslavia, that was totally the case in Yugoslavia. A lot of Roma, I had friends who were like completely, integrated. In a sense, they had houses, they had cars, they had jobs, they were regular people.
But when it comes to the issue of homelessness, then that just amongst the largely Yugoslav people that once honorable identity that used to be one country, Yugoslavia. But homelessness was just not something that existed largely in Yugoslavia. Unlike now, when we see all of the different former Yugoslav states, I mean, homelessness is a feature with the disaster capitalist era, right?
It's definitely a feature, but it's a bigger feature in the North, in North America. I mean, it's still, that's a long story, about like ownership of like, see a lot of, like in Yugoslavia, especially in Serbia, the transition was achieved at some point in the late 80s, early 90s, I would say, late 80s, early 90s. A lot of the public property, which was like everything was kind of public property. So like in socialist Yugoslavia, not everything, but a lot of housing, modern housing, where people lived in the cities anyway, for the most part, was social property. It was like social housing, right? Like most housing was social housing. The way the socialist kind of the transition happened is socialists in power, especially in Serbia, managed to privatize in a way that gave the workers their apartments. So you could for like small amount of money, let's say in today's, let's say, I don't know, your apartment, you live in social housing in Belgium, and then all of a sudden there's this massive privatization, and then the place that you live in becomes your own property, private property, for 5,000 euros, right? So a lot of people today still have owned their own apartments. So this, in the West, in Canada anyway, in the city where I live in, there are massive buildings, owned by the same guy, always have been, type thing. That never really happened in Yugoslavia. Capitalism wasn't advanced enough, even before the Second World War, before the revolution, to get to that kind of, concentration of wealth, at least in urban centers. Anyway,
interesting.
That's an aside, but the point is that, the right to housing was a thing. And I was reading some studies there about, on average in the 70s and in the 80s, people were spending about 10% of their income on housing, including everything, water, heating, all this stuff. Everything together was about 10%. Now, Communist Party of Canada says that it should be 20%. The official Canadian government measure for rent geared to income housing, which is almost non-existent these days, or it is definitely not being built, is 30%. Yugoslavia was 10%, and it wasn't, people weren't getting kicked out. Like right now in Serbia, in Belgrade, you don't pay your bill for a few months. Lawyers get involved. You basically get kicked out of it. They take your place. You know what I mean? So it doesn't take long. Like, few years of not answering, not hiring lawyers to fight back, not being able to pay the bills, and you're done. That couldn't happen. A, because the prices were so low, and B, because it was just there was no mechanism within law where you could deny somebody a right to their apartment.
Perfect segue to this. What happened to this once united country that saw civil war breakouts? And when we talk about the Yugoslavian civil wars and the dissolution of Yugoslavia, in popular media, popular history, even many left-wing outlets, it's a story of the bad guys, the evildoers, the evil Serbs, led by Slobodan Milošević. And so while you explain all of that, what is your assessment of Slobodan Milošević, of why Yugoslavia broke up, and what are the half-truths that you feel need to be pushed back? And answer that before I ask a follow-up question, which is about whether the Kosovo or Albanians had legitimate grievances and the propaganda behind the KLA. Lots to chew on. Lots to respond there, but
we'll get some water, man.
And while we do that, let me hold up. Let me just.
Radenska, the best mineral water in the world. from Alps mountains, mountains in Slovenia.
Nice.
Kraljevi Vrelec, Slovenia. I'm really happy that I have access to this water.
Nice. I'm just turning my camera off briefly because I want the audience to see the beautiful background of Ivan, because Skype always has a split screen. So I'm just loving this. I'm loving your office, man. It's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's called Lenin, Che. Yeah. I can't find my Yugoslavian flag. I was going to put it out, but I can't find it. I don't know where it is.
So what happened? What happened with the with the Yugoslavian? What happened? How did the Yugoslavian civil war break out? And talk and push back, if you want, against the simplistic narrative that it was all the evil Serbs, that it was Slobodan Milošević, this Serb nationalist. What are the half truths to any of that you want to push back against? And then even then you can talk about like Kosovo Albanians, and if they had, and what were the legitimate grievances that they had or didn't. Go ahead.
If you want to, I mean, let's. First of all, I'm going to agree that it was the Serbs in a very roundabout way. I'll say that it's the Serbs in a sense that Serbs did most of the killing in the 90s. Serbs did by far most of the killing. Most of the savagery, most of the worst atrocities were done by Serbs. It was revenge. It was that logic that communists, that we Yugoslavs, that Communist Party and Yugoslavian partisans tried to stop. It was, and managed to stop. So, what happened is we got in the way of a protracted civil war, which is ultimately caused by poverty and capitalism. You put competition and poverty together, competition, capitalism, and not working out, most people losing out, you get ethnic hatred. People divide into groups and they go at each other. Second World War, it was the Croats. 90s, it was the Serbs. It was, I mean they did most of the bad stuff. But
yes, and it's important, and it's also important to say this. Now, Tito died in the 1980s, and you said that there was a huge global mourning of him. Every single prime minister, every single ex-president of any head of state was at the funeral. Do you? So yeah. So it's.
He was the most respected, world leader by everyone, because he was nice to everyone. Like that if there's people that love Tito, like I have a friend who's like just a total Tito lover, right? Grew up like just indoctrinated into Tito love, and he just quotes Tito all the time. And a lot of what I know about Tito, I know through him. But Tito was cool with everybody. Tito was the poster child for leave everyone alone and let's have development. Tito, if Tito stands for anything, like who was Tito? You could say Tito was the guy who was Tito was the poster child for peaceful coexistence and development. That's what Tito believed in. He believed leave every country to do its own thing and help each other, cooperate, make sure everybody has enough, that the people are lifted out of poverty. When he went to Kosovo in the 70s, there was trouble in Kosovo all along. Kosovo was the poorest part of Yugoslavia. Kosovo was underdeveloped. The highest illiteracy, the poorest, lowest wages, highest unemployment, all this stuff, right? Serbs and Albanians live in Kosovo. We can go back. We go back to the point where we don't remember. So, like people that talk about percentages, percentages are only valid in the late 20th century. Before that, who knows? There was a decline of Serbian population, increase of Albanian population in Kosovo. Kosovo families were bigger. That's very common. They're mostly Muslim. They're mostly, the poorer the population, the higher the natality rate. That seemed to be the case as well. So, lots of hungry kids. Now, so there was always trouble in Kosovo. After the Second World War, Kosovo Albanians wanted to be part of Albania. Whatever their leadership, whatever, they felt that they should be a part of Albania. Barring that, they thought that they should be a republic because they were majority in Kosovo. They were, Kosovo should be a republic dominated by Kosovo Albanians. That was not the case. Kosovo didn't get the status of a republic. It at some point got the status of an autonomous region within Serbia, which was also compromised, right?
Yeah.
Now, early part of after Second World, first 2 decades, a Serbian hardcore Secret Service, head of Secret Service, the head policeman in Yugoslavia was suppressing the Kosovo nationalists. And basically, he wasn't terrorizing the place. You didn't have to speak Serbian. It was, but if you were talking about Kosovo as a republic or Kosovo being a part of Albania, you get, put in jail for as an enemy of the state. Tito got rid of him. Tito was, again, in many ways, a lot like Stalin, and in many ways even more Stalinistic than Stalin, like none of his close friends, stayed in power. Ranković, Žujović, Hebrang. If you look at the pictures from the Second World War, the people around him, one guy remains, and he, one guy, a few of them died very early, and the others got kind of retired from politics. So, Alexander Ranković got retired from politics, and there seemed to be a correspondence between him being kind of deposed from being the head of the state service or whatever the state, whatever you call it, the head from being the police guy, the main police guy, and the rise of of Kosovo status of Kosovo, right? So Kosovo started getting more, Albanians in Kosovo started getting more and more rights and control over the region. As he was the further we got away from the when Ranković got deposed. Now, in 1974, Tito goes to Kosovo. He's talking to the party officials there, visiting places and so on, and he says, we will not solve this ethnic strife here without development. The only way to solve this, to him, it's very simple. The more money you have, the more, the better the living standard, the less people worry about their nationalism and so on. And now, what happened is that didn't happen. The development didn't happen. It did happen to some extent, but then, and now it's capitalist world market. Yugoslavia, ultimately what happened is we didn't have the world revolution like Trotsky wanted to. Ultimately, we basically, had to defend communism, socialism in one country, in Soviet Union first, and then everywhere else. And we couldn't beat the imperialists, and they continued to sell us dreams. They continued to sell us American dream. and they had a really powerful culture industry, and they actually were really good at development. They were really good at development in the West, and they basically managed to convince us, and I'm you know, exhibit number one, that capitalism is better, you know, because they didn't show us Haiti, they didn't show us Congo, they didn't show us, you know, they didn't, you know, Hollywood doesn't make movies about capitalism in, you know, poor countries, you know, but they showed us, you know, Western Europe and America and then too. I mean, I have friends, you know, I have a friend, older like friend of mine, born in the 50s, and he remembers watching the movie called Midnight Cowboy with Dustin Hoffman
And John Voight, yes,
yeah, John Voight,
great,
that's right.
great movie. It's actually one of my favorite movies, but it's one of those movies that I can't even watch it a second time because it really does show you America in a nutshell. Yes, New York in a nutshell, but it really does show you how, yeah.
It changed everything. What he's saying is it changed everything. He's like me too. He you know, he lives in Canada. He emigrated in the 70s. He was driven by this, you know, American dream. And he actually achieved it because he lived in the 70s, and he's, you know, still conflicted, isn't it? Like, anyway, he, you know, that generation born in 50s, man, they came here, they got paid. They got jobs in the factories, they bought houses, they had cars. Life was cheap in the 70s, in the 80s. You know, they did really well. So anyway, the point is that what he told me is like that movie changed his world upside down, because before that, all he saw from America was how great it was. Amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Amazing America, success, beautiful, everything. They sold us a dream, and we bought it, hook, like line and sinker. But we wouldn't have bought it had we been happy. You know what I mean? So we were sucked into, and like, this is a simple story, but you know, a more complicated story is, you know, Yugoslavia got sucked into the world market, and came to be, you know, to subject to the whims, to Kondratiev waves, to capitalist world market. You know, Soviet Union in the 30s avoided the Great Depression. I mean, they had a famine, but it wasn't related to the Great Depression. Actually, it was. That's another story. But you know, capitalism reacts. You know, we react to
So
capitalism.
you're saying Yugoslavia, which did have a bit of a mixed economy, but
Yeah.
very tightly controlled by the leftists who were in power, that in the 1980s they started, like much of the global
Earlier.
economy, started to adopt more capitalism, what we call I hate the term neoliberalism, but they start to kind of adopt more Austrian economics, Thatcherist economics, Reaganomics. So Yugoslavia did their own version of that, capitalism with Yugoslavian characteristics, but and because of that, that's where you see the rise of Serbian nationalism. The
Yeah.
Serbs who feel that they're being
Serbs
that they're
didn't
being
start it.
cheated, kind of
Serbs
like.
didn't start it. Serbs didn't start it. Serbs just had the most powerful army and did most of the killing. You know, there was trouble in Kosovo all along. Croatian Spring, 1971. You know what I mean? Slovenians and Serbs had their uprising awakening at the same time in 1987 or so. So, you know, it's not, there's no, so as far as that goes, you know, Milošević didn't invent nationalism in Yugoslavia. You know what I mean? Like, there were people, Tudjman was, you know, saying worse things earlier.
Tudjman, who was the Croatian
Holocaust denier, you know, Croatia, leader of Croatia, yeah, leader of Croatia in the 90s, you know, wrote books about how, you know, denying the Holocaust and talking, you know, about Jews like in a Nazi kind of rhetoric, like greedy, horrible, scheming, Jews and.
But he was allies with, but he was allies of the West. So the West supported him because with Tito dead and with Yugoslavia, disintegrating because of capitalist reforms, because of the global economic system, which was shifting more and more to fiscal conservatism or fiscal neoliberalism. This Croatian SOB that you're talking about, basically, he was he basically was shifted Croatia to the right, to the far right.
He was worse than Milošević, but like these are worse in a sense that he was more fascistic. He was more of a fascist. Islamist Ali Izetbegović, very similar. Basically a fundamentalist, Islamist, intolerant, ethnonationalist, just like fanatics. Milošević was a socialist. He was also a nationalist, but he was also a socialist. Not saying the point is that not he's better than them. In a sense, like it's really hard to count these things because Milošević kind of Serbs had the Milošević was the most nationalistic of the communists. So while before there was Tudjman, before there was Tudjman Izetbegović, but before explicit pro-capitalist, essentially fascist forces were introduced into Yugoslavian politics officially, while they were not allowed and they didn't exist officially, Milošević was doing a Serbian nationalist thing. But again, Croatian party structure did the Croatian nationalist thing within the Communist Party 10 years before Milošević. Not quite 10, but early 70s. So, the story begins in the story that you're referring to, the story of evil Serbs and all this, the simplistic Western story begins with Milošević's provocations of Serbian nationalism in the late 80s, where he's going around making speeches saying it's time for Serbs to stand up and to take their rightful place, and we were not going to be beaten down, and so
in the Middle East, Rania Khalek has talked about this, that there's this thing in the Middle East, Sunni victimhood. Even though the Sunnis are the majority Muslim population in the Gulf states and much of the Middle East, including secular ones like the once Ba'athist government of Saddam Hussein, the current Ba'athist government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, but a majority of those countries are mostly Sunni people, and yet Sunni extremists and people who harbor Sunni sectarianism act as if they're the victims, act as if they're the ones that are being exploited, they're the ones that are not given their fair share of the pie. And Al-Qaeda, the Bin Ladens of the world, even ISIS, who are also Wahhabist extremists, they act as if they're the victims when actually they're the ones that are actually causing most of the problems in the world, but they use this victimhood, that it's the Shia, that it's the secularists, that it's this, that it's that, that's suppressing us. When
you can't win that game. You can't win that game. That's the thing. This is the deal. This is my simple story.
So when we talk about Yugoslavia, when we talk about the Serbian nationalism of a Milošević, who was more to the left as opposed to the reactionary right wing, nationalism. So did he have a Serbian victimhood that he subscribed to?
They all do. This is not a Serbian thing or a Sunni. Okay. Shiites have the same thing. Trust me. Croats were victims too. Slovenians, every nationalism. That's the thing. Every one of these nationalisms has the same characteristics, especially in a country that small and that insignificant, if you will. This is, this is not a matter, like they're literally colonizing each other. There's equivalency. You know what I mean? They were going into the battle, singing the same language, the same song, with the same lyrics, except for one word changed. Serbs and Croats. One word. Serbs would say Serbia, Croats would say Croatia. Everything else, exact same goddamn song. So, you know, what's simple here is that what we're dealing with is fascism. What we're dealing with is extreme nationalism and versus communism. And all these stories about who started it, who was worse, who did more killing, they never, all they're gonna do is create more of this. 90s was Serbian revenge for the Second World War. Second World War was Croatian revenge for Yugoslavian for former Yugoslavia dominated by the Serbs. You know, there's no end to this. This is the thing. There is no good guys here. So, you know, I mean, yeah, there are nuances, and one of them is that, you know, Milošević kind of started it, if we begin history, in 1985. And another one is that he was in 1999, let's say, you know, more anti-imperialist and more socialist than anyone else in the Balkans. Anyone else in the Balkans. But, you know, and another nuance, as I said, is that he was like, it was outrageous how nationalist he was for a communist. But like for a nationalist, he was nothing. So that's why we have different interpretations of his speeches. You know, there was a pro-Serbian, you could say, anti-imperialist kind of, you know, line of thinking in the West, on the Western left, reading his speeches and saying, look, there's nothing nationalistic about this. But if you're living in Yugoslavia like we did in 1980s, and you're listening to this guy on on TV saying, you know, long live Serbia, and Serbian flags without the star being waved, you're like horrified. This is the biggest sin. This is the sin. So Tito, that was like, that's what people went to jail for. That's why it was so outrageous, because it's not even without the star, with like old Serbian crest under which, you know what I mean, Croatian villages were getting wiped out in the Second World War, and Muslim villages and so on. So this is messy and complicated, but it's actually very simple. Capitalism creates misery, poverty, and competition at the same time. People retreat into ethnonationalism, and they destroy each other, and they cause slaughter. And the only cure is abundance and equality for all, which is socialism. And ultimately, why what happened in Yugoslavia happened is because, ultimately, I think it is because in '48 Tito started the ball rolling on not sticking together, or because Trotsky and Stalin couldn't get their shit together and do it together, and unite because there was this unity, and because we didn't beat the imperialists and basically end them, because as long as you let them live, it's a cancer. You know what I mean? Imperialism, capitalism is a cancer. It's a competition. It's a system of exploitation and greed and insatiable destruction, and it's going to do that. And it's very productive. It's very productive at that. That's the thing about imperialism. It's productive. It creates wealth. You know what I mean? and yeah. So one more thing about, you know, one more kind of economic point is what's interesting is that the biggest grievances were always economic in the beginning. Every, you know, grievance, Kosovo grievance, we are poor, we are undeveloped. Why is Kosovo being left behind? You know, Serbian grievance, why is Slovenia so much richer than Serbia? Slovenians, like, why do we have to buy our you know, tomatoes from Serbia when we could get them cheaper from Albania? Always. But on a personal level, like on an individual level, we were watching American movies, and we were lied to because Hollywood is, the ideological, wing of the imperialist world order. Make no mistake, that's what it is. It's so add to that, but the funniest thing about how good was Yugoslavia, in a sense. So it wasn't that we were just miserable. It was that our expectations were really high, and we actually had it pretty good, but we didn't know it at the time. The biggest grievance in Yugoslavia was people saying, I am educated. They got the education for free. I have a degree in economics, but I cannot find employment as an economist. People in Yugoslavia would not, somebody with a history degree would not, under any circumstances, teach violin in a private school or drive a bus. I have a master's in history. If I was living in Yugoslavia in the 80s, I would be on TV, telling Americans, poor me, this crazy system. I have a master's in history and I don't get to teach at a university. There's no job for me. Down with socialism. So people, that was the biggest grievance. You know what I mean? People somehow thought that they're gonna become economists in the West with their economics degree. No, they came over here. Their degrees were not recognized. They were cleaners. They're cleaning the toilets in Belgium. That's how that actually worked. But who would know that? We didn't know that at the time. We were spoiled. In some ways, we were so spoiled. And everybody knows that, too, now.
Then, perfect segue to this question, because you answered the question that the Kosovo Albanians did have legitimate grievances, and of course, there's lots of propaganda behind the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was actually a bunch of reactionary Islamists, mobsters, and ghoulish ethno-nationalists that also did a lot of killings of Serbs. The Serbs also did a lot of killings as well, but civil war for you. Serbia was often depicted as the group most engaged in war crimes towards the people of Kosovo, but also Bosnian Muslims. The word genocide is often used to describe what Serbia did to Bosnian Muslim men, as well as the mass rapes of women. Was this true that Serbia did engage in genocide, or was this a half-truth? Or what's your assessment? Because these atrocities that Serbia allegedly did is often used as the raison d'etre for why NATO had to get involved, why liberal imperialists and neoconservatives invented the responsibility to protect the doctrine, and so talk about that.
Again, yes and no. As I said, Serbs did most of the killing. There were rape camps. There were, atrocities. You can even call. I don't know. I really I've never. I don't want to play this game about what whether it's genocide or not. Let's say it's genocide. I'm not opposed to that being said. That happened. The West, however, and I'm sorry, Serbs had the military in their hands. Serbs were the biggest nation in the Balkans. Muslims in Bosnia, Bosniaks were a tiny minority with no military and no state. They got the short end of the stick. Same in Croatia. Serbs were stronger. They had the military. There was more of them. So they did more killing. Kind of like how the Croats in the Second World War had the Nazi support, had the state, had the military, had all this stuff, managed to do more killing. And it was literally revenge. It was like Serbs were not allowed by the communists to exact revenge on the Croats. Yeah. They did, but to a very little, not enough, in their opinion anyway. Ridiculous. I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's not funny at all. But so that's kind of true. What's also true is that it was a civil war in which every one of the three sides had the same attitude towards the other, and Muslims did as much, the same kind of killing and the same kind of savagery to Serbian civilians as the Serbs did to them.
Same with the Kosovo Liberation Army, which the West backed, right?
Exactly. And these were, on all sides, these were ethno-nationalist people who believed that it's okay to exterminate the others. Croats did it to Serbs, Muslims did it to Serbs, Croats did it to Muslims, Muslims did it to Croats, and Serbs did it to everybody else. And the conflict between Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo was, there were two sides to it. Again, Serbia was stronger until Americans got involved. Now, the reason that NATO was involved from day one, there was a really curious moment at which NATO, the IMF and World Bank decided to, infuse Poland and Czechoslovakia with a structural adjustment funding, whatever, with a funding package, money, right? And did not do it for Yugoslavia. Had they done that, this would have been a victory for the unifying Yugoslavian, liberal centralist government, which was still nominally communist, right? So like the West decided not to bail out Yugoslavia, knowing full well the consequences of that will be that the nationalists are going to be Central Yugoslavian government is worthless. They can't even get help from the Americans. They're useless. Let's bring them down. Long live Serbia / long live Yugoslavia, long live Croatia. Sorry, long live all these little statelets. And they, decided to, Germany recognized Croatia's independence. Like they, went ahead and decided to break up Yugoslavia on purpose and to pick sides. They knew that there's going to be a war as a consequence. They knew it.
Everybody. Okay, that's perfect. That's a perfect segue to this question.
Sorry.
The big thorny question, often overlooked, was what was the real sinister role of the United States, Germany, and the NATO alliance engaging in divide and conquer and facilitating the breakup of Yugoslavia. Often, when the West facilitates through imperialism the support of secessionist forces, it could be Kurds in Syria, it could be Tigray in Ethiopia, it could be South Sudan. The term anti-imperialists use is balkanization. The term balkanization will come up when talking about that. So that being said, what was the real role of the US, the UK, Germany, France, Canada, and NATO in this tragedy, which is the Yugoslavian Civil War and the dissolution of Yugoslavia?
You got to go back to the Second World War. These guys, they were running away from the communists, the Nazis, Serbian and Croatian fascists, and Muslim fascists, Bosnian fascists, and Slovenian fascists, and Kosovo Albanian fascists. When they were running away from partisans at the end of the Second World War, a lot of them ended up in the West. The West supported Tito, supported Soviet Union in the Second World War against the Nazis. But as soon as the Nazis were defeated, the day after, they reverted back to their anti-communism. And there then started the Cold War, right? Now, Cold War equals, in the West specifically, what does the Cold War mean in the West to vis-a-vis Yugoslavia? What's the relationship? How did, Cold War manifest itself on the question of Yugoslavia? By the Western powers harboring and nurturing Nazis, fascists, Croatian fascists, Serbian fascists, KLA fascists. In Canada, we have the official policy of multiculturalism. In the United States, they call it melting pot, whatever. Every one of these, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, United States, in all of these countries, the same thing happened. These cultural Nazis were allowed to set up shop and to purchase weapons and to produce propaganda and to build statues to people like Bandera, Pavelić, Mihailović, Đujić, these monsters.
And they all have they all come from these well-funded, government-funded civil society groups, NGO, semi-NGO groups. They have very benign and very innocent-sounding names, like the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, or the Congress, or the Estonian-Canadian Congress, all these different versions, but all of these civil society groups, which were anti-communist groups, but they were all founded by runaway Nazi war criminals, runaway Nazi collaborators, and they lionize people like Stepan Bandera, and they lionize these Nazi collaborators, and basically they're a bunch of wolves in sheep's clothing, and this is where people like Chrystia Freeland come from.
And these people like Chrystia Freeland, they caused the war in Yugoslavia. So, there's the big picture, there's the economy, stupid, there's the world market, there's the specific actions by, World Bank, by IMF, and so on, United Nations, all this, big geopolitical stuff. There's the big Cold War. What I forgot to mention is that Yugoslavia had the fourth largest military in Europe. Now, that's not a good thing. That's a good thing in the short term, because you have to defend yourself from the possible Soviet invasion or the American invasion. But two consequences of that. Number one, you didn't spend money on improving the education, school, healthcare, life for the people. Right. Number two, everybody's armed and trained and ready to fight. And that's, that explains the savagery. That explains the extent of that explains the war in Yugoslavia. Ultimately, it's like that's the kind of ingredient that did not exist in Poland, that did not exist in Czechoslovakia, that it didn't exist in many other places.
Then behind the scenes, lots of declassified documents and investigative journalists have dug into have dug into this. But behind the scenes, the U.S. and a united Germany, when communism ended in Eastern Germany, and then it became united with Western Germany. So both the U.S. and Germany, and of course their allies, behind the scenes, they were doing divide and conquering, what's now called balkanization. So supporting the most reactionary forces in Croatia, the far right expats community, which again depicts themselves as being advocates of liberal democracy, when really no, they are fascists. They are, they are Nazis, but basically, yes. So Germany and the U.S., and their allies were behind. They were basically doing a lot of divide and conquer. They intervened.
Like specifically, Germany recognized Croatia as soon as Croatia declared independence. Germany recognized it, knowing that that's going to result in a war, that's going to be the end of Yugoslavia. And, United States followed closely behind. They, ultimately they came in and literally provided the cover, the airplanes, whatever. They bombed Yugoslavia. They intervened on Croatian part in cleansing of the Serbian minority in 1990. Was it 6? Something like that. When that
So that's
war is always good for business, for the American business. They don't care. You know what I mean? Like the United States at this point is essentially I mean, this is a whole another story, but a huge element of American economy is the war machine and weapons manufacturing, right? So they're not, people think Americans want to come in and exploit. They don't mind just dumping a bunch of bombs. You know what I mean? Instead.
But isn't it? But it's kind of. But it's sort of ironic though that a united Germany, unfortunately, under under this myth of being a liberal democracy, but a united Germany, one of the first major foreign policies they do is dividing and conquering Yugoslavia and supporting ethno-nationalists and and these Nazi fascist hangovers of World War II, right?
Liberals and fascists, like fascists are liberals' little brother. They're always together.
Yes, I often say that liberalism is that liberalism is basically fascism with good table manners.
That's what it is. They're no different. They're same families, the same. It's like tiny little differences. Fascism kicks in when liberalism is in trouble to save it, and liberalism is only fascism under threat, or fascism with a strong working class movement. Liberalism is what they have to do when they can't do what they want to do.
So that's a perfect segue. So Yugoslavia ends as a country at the end of the 90s. The 1999 bombing of Serbia for alleged human rights abuses of Kosovo, for an impending genocide of the Kosovo Albanians, sees basically Kosovo becomes a protectorate of NATO, and eventually Kosovo gets its independence from Serbia. But let's talk about Serbia. This is my second to last question, which is what happened to Serbia following the NATO bombing? Because Slobodan Milošević stayed in power for a fairly long time, and it was only through a color revolution that he was ousted. What's the state of Serbia now? How I mean the left has been all but destroyed in Serbia, but even the far right, which dominates the body politic of Serbia, still are very hostile towards NATO. They don't disavow their communist past, really, or Milošević, and they seek peaceful relations with Russia, currently under the fiscal conservative and socially regressive leadership of Vladimir Putin. And so so talk to us about Serbia after Slobodan Milošević and your assessment of Kosovo as a nation.
Kosovo is occupied territories, Bosnia is occupied territories. Croatia is occupied territories. Serbia is a little different, but not that much different, Serbia's gone through its transition, right? Serbia has had, 90s where sanctions ending up with bombing and conquest. Well, not conquest, but yeah, color revolution, conquest in a way of color revolution. I mean, people. I'm not gonna lie, like I don't really, I'm not in tune with what's exactly happening right now, right? I mean, I know that the current leadership is that it's that coalition. It's the right-wing leadership, right? It's like similar to the Orban in Hungary, to Putin himself. It's a right-wing. It's a right-wing, political party.
But all of the former Yugoslavia, in fact, the entire reach of Eastern Europe is all dominated by not just one far right party, but multiple far right parties, libertarian parties. Some of the libertarian parties, yes, they're fiscally conservative neoliberalism, but socially, a little bit more tolerant of, minorities, LGBT plus people and so forth. But the other far right parties you get the worst of both worlds. You get the worst of both worlds of fiscal conservatism and social regressivism. Whereas Serbia, though, the only positive things about Serbian nationalism of the right is that they don't want to be part of NATO. They don't want to be like a puppet of NATO, and
they kind of want to, though. They kind of want
détente with Russia.
They're divided. They're divided. Like you said that Kosovo is recognized by Serbia. It's not. So Kosovo is not finished story. Serbian part of Bosnia is still very much up in the air. It's there's this nationalist boogeyman that's always there. Like Serbs got bombed by NATO. Serbia got attacked by the West. Serbia felt the imperialist boot on its neck, and so that you can't just waltz into Serbia and say, oh, we're now gonna be a part of NATO. So so that's the leadership is not necessarily being, I don't know, good for refusing. Like, it's not like the people in power in Serbia don't want to be a part of NATO. They'll do whatever it pays, and there is a difference. What's really, again, we're getting into a little bit of speculation on my end because I'm not that well informed, but it appears to me that there is a bit of a swing in political power away from the West and towards China and Russia and the whole Milošević was getting really close to China before they got rid of him. That kind of continues. Like, Milošević was defeated, but he wasn't, the deal was, we'll give up Milošević, but we can't go full on Croatian Nazi. Do you know what I mean? It's still Serbia. You still just did bomb us. It's really humiliating for us to bow down to you now, you being the West. We want to, but the people won't let us. Something like that. So there's a swing here, towards Serbia is Russian sphere of influence. It always was. It's a thing. So Serbian nationalism is, basically Russian nationalism. So Serbian liberalism is Russian liberalism, right? So that's. But like, really, I talked to my Croatian friend, right? And I gave him something like the story that you just gave me. Isn't there like Croats are with the Ukrainians and Serbs are with the Russians, right? Says no, actually no. Like, a lot of Croats are with Russians, and it's also true that a lot of Serbs are with Ukrainians. It's not that clear over there anymore. It's not really that clear. Again, like, this nationalist story assumes that people are nationalists, but they're really not. The Balkans is really mixed in with imperialism. You know what I mean? Like, Balkans has a socialist history. It has a history of being, in alliance with Russia. Some of it, anyway. These are all factors, and it's getting tricky, And there is that whole legacy of Serbia being like socialist, some kind of socialist. Like, it was like, the liberals hated it. They were like, this is this is so archaic and ridiculous. There's little Serbia being little brother of the China, But China, and that was China under Deng, like that was China before, or whatever Deng is there. It was before this huge kind of new thing that happened in China with Xi. So, that was that China. But anyway, it was ridiculous to them, but it really isn't ridiculous, and now it turns out to be a thing, so like Nicaragua's working with China, right? Like, I mean, there's, China's a player. Milošević would be very happy.
You can respond. I'm going to combine these two questions, and you can respond to any of them. And I think that's that's where that's when we'll close this conversation, which is your assessment of the International Criminal Court on the former Yugoslavia and the death of Milošević. Milošević's critics, and I'm actually going to confess right now, one of my best, one of my friends actually is a Kosovo Albanian, believes in Kosovo being an independent state, and she's very much pro NATO when and thinks that the West was completely in the right to bomb Serbia. She supported Milošević and the mostly Serbs of Yugoslavia being prosecuted. She thinks that Milošević did a Hermann Göring and poisoned himself, committed suicide in prison. But I want, so that being said, I want your assessment of the International Criminal Court on the former Yugoslavia and the death of Milošević. And in closing, what do you think any student of history, anyone who calls themselves anti-war, anti-imperialist, and is part of the peace movement, especially when it comes to campaigning for the abolishment of NATO, needs to understand or even re-educate themselves about the destruction of Yugoslavia and NATO's role in it? Because so often NATO's bombing of Serbia, Kosovo, and Kosovo getting independence are often seen by many, including leftists, as the good war. Was it really that, or but we all know that that so much of the bloodshed, this horrible thing, the responsibility to protect doctrine, and even though and there are people who say that even though NATO does a lot of nefarious shit, like what they did to Libya, what they're trying to do to Syria, but on this one topic, they say that NATO, Clinton, Blair, Chirac, Schroeder, the EU and NATO were in the right side of history with what they did to Serbia and Milošević.
So, who's in jail in the Western countries? Like, who ends up in jail in the United States of America? What kind of profile of a person? Who's in jail? What are the jails? Who are the jails in the United States full of? Poor people. Of course, black people, Hispanics are overrepresented among poor people, but forget that. Bottom line, people in capital.
The Native Americans.
Yeah. But really, I actually want to bracket that. The actual basic kind of litmus test of who's in jail in North American, Western, in capitalist countries, it's poor people. Is that because they're guilty? No. That's because they're poor. They're in jail because they're poor. Jails are for poor people. The point, you can get away with anything in the West with money. The reason rich people are not in jail in Western countries, in capitalist countries, is because it's capitalism, because rich people rule these countries, and they're not going to put themselves in jail. Stalin put intellectuals in jail. He put, rich peasants in jail. Tito, Yugoslavia, when they came to power, they put rich. They put the landowners, factory owners. That's who went to jail. So, there is no independent, let's just make that clear. There is no independent judiciary. Capitalists own the world. Capitalists set up this tribunal. It was a part of the Dayton Accords that everyone had to sign to end the Bosnian War. Bosnian War was ended. There was a provision in the Bosnian War, which seemed in the papers that ended Bosnian War in Bosnia, that to set up this little tribunal. And of course, you know, it makes sense that the worst perpetrators of crimes would end up, you know, being ended up in court, have the day in court. There's no such thing as independent judiciary. That's a myth. That's a capitalist lie. The purpose of the court is the same purpose that the NATO serves, which is to advance the interests of the Western grand bourgeoisie, big owners of capital, people who own the everything. People who own the war machine are the ones whose interests are served in the courts, within West and everywhere that they have power over. So that's what International Court for Yugoslavia is. Again, in a sense, it's fair that, you know, there was more Serbs in that place than let's say Muslims, because Serbs did most of the killing and so on. But this court is not about justice. It's not about who committed crimes. Tony Blair, Bill Clinton committed crimes. That war was undeclared. That war was unprovoked. That war was there's no excuse for their involvement in occupying Kosovo. NATO, Western countries actively provoked this war. They you know, Western powers did everything they could for it to happen, to bring it about. They harbored Nazis for decades. They nurtured them. They sent them back. They let them send weapons down there. They recognized, you know, Croatia, knowing that there was the Serbs are going to start a war over that. You know, they didn't stop the war. They created the war. They carried out the war. They supported with weapons and you know, all kinds of military support, belligerents in the war. The reason NATO was fighting the Serbs is not because Serbs were the bad guys. It was because the Serbs had a socialist president who was making advances towards communist China. Milošević, of course, NATO. I mean, you got to be an idiot to think that people who are willing to starve a million Iraqis, people who, you know, who are occupying, terrorizing, you know, I mean, beginning with opium wars. I mean, we just, it's British Empire, man. It's British Empire, U.S. Empire. All they do is rape and pillage, conquer, and destroy.
And sorry to interrupt, but it's interesting because you mentioned Milošević trying to build greater ties with China. What was the one embassy that NATO bombed during their reign of terror, their Dresden, Tokyo firebombing reign of terror on Serbia and Kosovo?
Yeah.
Chinese embassy.
Yeah. No, so that's the thing, you know, like, again, I mean, we've spent enough time here talking about Milošević and his faults and whatnot. But, like, NATO is never going to save anybody. NATO creates, imperialism creates misery and war. Americans wanted Yugoslavia to blow up from day one. They never wanted it in the first place. They never, of course, they never wanted. The whole goal of the Western capitalist regimes embodied in the military alliance of NATO has always been to destroy and conquer Yugoslavia. And they managed to do it. This is their work. This is all they want. And the same with Russia. And same with everywhere else. They will not tolerate. This is a totalitarian, you know, obsessive ideology that works here. Like the imperialism is not just, about money. It's like this liberal imperialist like doctrine or way of thinking is extreme. It's totalitarian. They will not rest until the whole world is conquered. NATO is supposed to be a defensive alliance that was supposed to protect Western Europe from Eastern Europe. Look at it now. NATO is in China, man. And NATO is everywhere. Like they will not rest. So it's not really. It doesn't matter whether Milošević is a good bad guy or whether he was exterminating China, and he wasn't. Like that's another story. But like he personally, kind of like Tito, cannot be connected to what people that he supported in Bosnia, Bosnian Serbs and in Croatia did. But that's not the point. Let's say that he's a total monster, crazy guy. They're not. They don't care. They've supported people who are so much worse than Milošević, so much worse. Death squads everywhere. You know what I mean? Across the world. You name a country, there's probably a story about Pinochet, Somoza,
Suharto.
I mean,
Pol Pot.
Yeah, like this is what they do. This is what they do. They don't care if you're exterminating minorities or not. It's our guys. So that's the thing. What happened in Yugoslavia is Croats were trying to cleanse Croatia of Serbs, and Serbs were trying to cleanse the Serbian part of Croatia of Croats. And the Americans intervened on the Croatian side because Tudjman was, yes, I will do what you say. I am a neoliberal. I'm fully on board with your what do you want? Same with Kosovo. Kosovo was a conflict between Albanian nationalists, fascists, who tried to cleanse Kosovo of the remaining Serbs, and Serbs who wanted to cleanse Kosovo of the remaining Albanians, or Serbia of remaining Albanians.
And that kind of sectarianism still exists, where if you're a Serb in Kosovo, it sucks to be you. If you're a Serb in Bosnia-Herzegovina, it sucks to be you. And of course, in Croatia, it's hey, the fascists got to come back.
But look, the point is that NATO, what do students of history need to draw from this? The lesson is Yugoslavia is no different than anywhere else. We have an imperialist, totalitarian, neoliberal, mad bull going around trying to conquer the whole world, enslave everybody, create poverty, misery, homelessness, racism, sexism, everything, everywhere. Don't make it like, and this, poor gays and lesbians in Russia. What about gays and lesbians in Saudi Arabia, man? What about gays and lesbians in, half of your client states across the world? Worse. It's worse. So no. You can always, poverty creates misery, misery creates hatred. You're always going to find a hatred to want to have to stop. How do you stop hatred? Tito's going to tell you, with development and abundance for all. That's how you stop hatred. You don't stop hatred by conquering people and putting them in jail and putting them on trial. And what happened to Milošević? That's ridiculous. What your friend told you, that he killed himself in court. I mean, you know what? It's as ridiculous as what I'm hearing from others saying that he was killed by maybe not. Whatever. Who cares? It doesn't matter. How are you going to know? You know what I mean? Like, maybe someday we'll find out, but it doesn't even matter. The point is that he was put in jail. Tony Blair is not in jail. Bush is not in jail. Madeleine Albright's not in jail. Henry Kissinger is not in jail. Like monsters with millions of lives on their hands. Monsters, like just sick, twisted, warmongering monstrosities of humans, and some little guy that was fighting was defending his village. That's the thing. It's like, who are these people in international tribunal? These are small time, like a lot of them are small commander guy that was fighting. The war started, he had arms, the other guy had arms, village against village. What are you going to do? People are fighting a civil war, and in a sense, we're all victims of it. And that's what I'm saying, you know what I mean? Ultimately, like, compared to Henry Kissinger, 90% of the people, not 90%, everyone that ever ended up in Hague in the tribunal is a joke. NATO is the real danger. NATO is the imperialist armies are the real danger, and they only give what you take from them. The only goodness of the West has to do, like, the reason we have rights in the West, or that we want some of the rights for gays and lesbians, for women, for whatever minorities. This is because of Soviet Union, because of the threat of worldwide communism, because of socialist, communist, labor, because of activists, because of fighting. We fought for every bit of it, everywhere in the world. And all they've done is try to suppress it. It was never, no capitalist ever had an idea to give free healthcare, education, or abortion rights, or anything good.
It's also important. It's also important to know, when we talk about imperialism, why I don't really call myself anti. I mean, I am anti-war. I am anti-violence. But the reason why I talk so much about being an anti-imperialist is because, number one, as a leftist, we have to be against we have to be anti-imperialist, because imperialism advances endless capitalism, militarism, and whatnot. For me, it's the supreme evil of the capitalist system. But imperialism doesn't just stop with, it doesn't just stop and end with overthrowing left-wing governments, whether one is democratic or one is more totalitarian. But it even goes against their own allies. Mobutu, he was a capitalist. He was he was an African tribalist, and even though he was a loyal servant to Canada, to Israel, to the United States, they fucking betrayed him by supporting ethno-nationalist Rwandan death squads led by Paul Kagame, backed by Youri Museveni in Uganda, and overthrew Mobutu, and now Congo is just in this constant basket case where there's a new scramble of Africa going on, led by Rwanda and led by whatever bootlicker for the American, French, and Belgian pan-European empires. Noriega was a drug cartel capitalist thug for the American empire, and the moment he started to say to America that, hey, Panama, we deserve a little bit of sovereignty, I need to actually provide for my people, and then they firebombed Panama and overthrew Noriega, where he was just in one kangaroo court after another and was just in jail indefinitely for the rest of his life. Then you look at Saddam Hussein, who got in power thanks to the West, thanks to the UK and the Americans, and he invades, Kuwait, and and the West could have easily have brokered peace, because the West was allied with both Kuwait and Iraq, but instead they decided, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to completely recolonize and restructure Iraq, which is what they did. And they still backed Iraq after the Gulf War, when there was popular uprisings against him, but they sided with Saddam again in the end, because they just did not want a new independent Iraq that said, we are no longer going to be clients of you guys. And then, of course, comes the collective punishment with the monstrous sanctions of mass destruction that was inflicted on Iraq, and then the biggest evil, which was enacted on Iraq, which was the second Iraq invasion. So imperialists will even
zero
brutally
tolerance.
flip on their own allies too.
Zero. They have zero tolerance for independence. Zero tolerance. Like I would go further.
Even Viktor Yanukovych, since we're talking about NATO and Eastern Europe, even Viktor Yanukovych, who wasn't even a leftist, he was actually a center-right person that simply wanted peaceful coexistence with his Russian neighbors, possibly joining the EU, but again, that was too much for the U.S. to tolerate, so they overthrow him. They back neo-Banderites. They back ethno-nationalist Ukrainians who want to suppress Ukrainians of a Russian-speaking background, and that leads us to the clusterfuck of a situation we're in right now. And even Putin, the power that Putin inherited from Yeltsin, who was literally a bootlicker for Western imperialists. The only reason why Putin inherited a state with a very strong centralized presidency, where most of the media is either in government control hands or it's in the hands of an ally of Putin, that he all inherited from Yeltsin, who, when they tried to stop the shock doctrine and the horrible austerity that was inflicted on Russia, China had a century of humiliation. The 90s was the decade of a civilizational downgrade in Russia. And the only reason why the West does not like Putin, even though he's fiscally conservative, even though he's socially regressive, like the far right that we have in Canada and so forth, the only reason why the West is against Putin is because he's not their son of a bitch.
Exactly. And he's cutting into their profits, you know? And there's absolutely no tolerance. That's the thing. They have zero tolerance for any dissent. Like anyone that remotely looks like they might know it, 100% bow down, will be invaded. And it's a good deal because every war is making money for the people in power. Selling weapons.
And folks, even if you folks, I wouldn't vote for Putin. The guy's like Ron Paul to me. I agree with him on some issues and violently disagree with him on a lot of issues, mainly related to capitalism and so forth. But if Putin was overthrown tomorrow, I understand that the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Putin. If he's put in jail tomorrow, guess what, guys? The people who are going to replace him, Navalny, who apparently everybody says that we should show solidarity to him. Amnesty International says that he's a prisoner of conscience. That mother effer, Navalny, is a crook, is an Islamophobe, is also a queerphobe. He is no feminist. He is not for workers' rights. He's just a rival oligarch, but one who's more of a bootlicker to Western imperialists, unlike Putin. And any other thing you want to say about Yugoslavia before we end before we end this the Youri Rogan experience?
A lot of things, but like bottom line is it was beautiful how we managed to get together and stop the slaughter and focus on development and focus on creating a very beautiful, very innocent society that we might want to talk again about just how innocent, how like there's a movie about the first case of car theft in socialist Yugoslavia in 1976, the year I was born. So like no car was stolen in Yugoslavia between the revolution and like 30 years later. And that car that was stolen was for fun. Like it was really nice, and people remember it, and people need to remember it, and we need to study it because there were people heroically stood up to hatred. People stood up to nationalism, and they created a society that in which everybody was lived with dignity, in which everybody was quite well off, and in which it's not just well off. It's like, people were full, people were happy, people were in love with each other. Like I'm a product of a love between a Serb and a Croat, you know, and it's like that's beautiful. And that's
so do you think pan-Latin Americanists, which also includes English-speaking Caribbean countries, do you think pan-Africanists of a left perspective and the idea of a new pan-Eastern European left project or a pan-Middle Easternist project, which is secular, which is feminist, with Islamic characteristics, which has queer liberation, but with Middle Eastern characteristics, which includes Christians, Kurds, Yazidis, Druze, Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, secular Muslims. Do you think all of that left, people who even have these ideas can learn a lot from the Yugoslavian socialist model that once existed?
Of course, and I would go further. Like I mean, pan globalists, like literally, like white Americans. Like we have to include white Americans. We have to include the English. Everybody has to be in love. We have to stop, national divisions. Like we have to accept differences. That's the lesson in Yugoslavia. I'm sorry, we talked a lot about, bad things, but like that's the lesson. The lesson is, of course, Chinese Han are going to be different from whatever, Serbs or from American whites. But we all have to get together. We all have to get together. We need world-class unity, working class unity across the world, and we have to admire and love each other, and that goes beyond nation. But like ultimately, we have to start working on unity, and the bigger the better. So you're talking pan, Caribbean, Latin American. Why not include the North Americans? Why don't include the whole world? Why not? Because that's the battle.
And Haiti should be a leader in that. So that's
the cure. That's the cure. That's the only answer to this disaster. Is everything that happens because of hatred, because we're divided. We have to unite. We have to love each other and respect each other and each other's differences. Leave each other alone.
Here's hoping a newly formed Yugoslavian communist states can be reformed. Here's hoping that a new pan-Eastern European bloc of leftist nations and societies can have a comeback, and hopefully the same with Pan-Africanism, Pan-Latin Americanism. But we all have to, of course, unite. The old workers of the world, need to unite. And that's a perfect place to end. Wow, we were joined on this edition, this special, nearly 3-hour, I jokingly call it the Youri Smaulder experience, the Youri Rogan experience. We were joined on this edition of 1+1, our all things Eastern European history and current affairs, our all things former and current communist states special, all things Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia special, with Ivan Stoiljkovic, a Yugoslavian-Canadian, who is, he is he is a violin teacher and bus driver by day, but by night he is a leftist activist and one of my communist superheroes. Ivan, thank you so much for taking time out, not just the other day, but on a Saturday, to talk to me. I hope the audience enjoys this. Apologies, guys, if this was a long edition, but if you're a history buff and you want to teach students about Yugoslavia, you would do no wrong than to show people this interview. Again, Ivan, thank you so much for joining me. It was such an honor.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.